So welcome, everyone. Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. So I'm Stormy Annika Mildner. I am the director of the Aspen Institute here in Germany. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the already 13th edition of our virtual series State-to-State German-American State Legislator Dialogue, which brings together state legislators from both sides of the Atlantic, and usually it is Germany and the United States. But today we have the great pleasure to do something out of the box and also bring our partner Canada into the discussion. So this is a little bit today of a special format. We are hoping that our speaker from the United States is also going to join us. Otherwise, it's going to be a German-Canadian dialogue today, which is also really a wonderful thing. And I'm going to introduce our speakers in a second. So we are delighted that we are doing this project, the speaker series, together with the American Council on Germany, an institute situated or sitting in New York, which you all know because of the many activities ACG is doing on both sides of the Atlantic. We believe that a lot of policies are made not just in Washington or Berlin or in Brussels, the capitals, but that a lot of important policy decision-making takes place on the sub-federal level in the states, in the provinces, in the Bundesländer. And that's why we had initiated this dialogue series a few years ago. So we are excited that all of you joined us today. We picked out a topic which we think is of great importance because it stands it is one of the foundations and one of the hearts of our societies, and that is critical infrastructure. I think all of us know whenever you open the paper, you find a story about critical infrastructure under stress. A bridge which broke down, streets which don't work, hospitals in rural areas which are aging and don't offer what is needed by their populations. And we see a lot of threats to critical infrastructure, both coming from weather phenomena, but also from such as flooding or storms or droughts, but also from the health issues like pandemics, but certainly also man-made threats like cyber threats, for example. But there are a lot of threats to critical infrastructure. And responding to these threats is not always so easy because it also requires setting priorities, and it also requires a little bit of money to be invested in infrastructure. And we do see a lot of weaknesses with regard to investment in infrastructure. So this is why we decided to take a closer look today at critical infrastructure, what we see on the ground and what can be done. And for this, it's a great pleasure to have two state legislators here today who bring in a ton of expertise from both sides of the Atlantic. One of them is Representative Heide Richter-Airijoki. She is a member of Parliament of Saxony-Anhalt. Heide, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you too for the opportunity to be here and share with you. I have really appreciated the exchanges we had all along. I look forward to this. Thank you.
And Heide is a health specialist and brings along a lot of knowledge on health issues. And we just posted her CV in the chat function so that you can read up a little bit more about Heide. And it is also a really great pleasure from Canada to welcome Michael Lee, a member of the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Stormy, it's a pleasure to be joining you today at this session, and thank you to Aspen Institute Germany for providing the opportunity for the 30 state legislators that represented Germany and the United States and Canada to share some learnings with you today.
Yeah, and so do we. And as you might have noticed, Heide and Michael know each other. And they know each other because they participated in our Laboratories of Democracy project. And in this project, we brought together 10 Canadian legislators, 10 Germans, and 10 Americans who worked diligently over the course of a year, having also 2 physical study trips, and in the end presented policy recommendations what could be done about critical infrastructure. Just a few notes on housekeeping today. This discussion is going to be recorded, so you can also share it with your friends afterwards. It's going to be on YouTube. And we want to make this interactive, so we are looking forward to your active participation, which means that you can post your questions in the Q&A function, and then I will bring it into the discussion. So don't be shy, and if something pops into your mind, just write it down and we bring it into the discussion. We are also still waiting for our youth participant, Representative Karen Lisenby. She is a member of the Utah House of Representatives, and as soon as she hops on, we bring her into the discussion. So when we talk about critical infrastructure, we need to know what we are really talking about. So maybe Michael and Heide, maybe you can explain to us, because not every infrastructure is critical, obviously, but what we mean by critical infrastructure when we talk about critical infrastructure. Maybe I can start with you, Michael.
So much that we've seen in various crisis situations demonstrates what's critical to our populations in our countries and our states. And when we rely on transportation networks or healthcare, safety, security, we know and we recognize what we need for communities to survive. We get access to their food, clean drinking water, electricity and power. So these are examples of the types of considerations that the group looked at in terms of defining what is essential services that people rely on to get on with their daily lives. And I know that certainly when we see various crises, whether it's a healthcare crisis or a natural disaster or a cyber attack, then we recognize where the vulnerabilities are in infrastructure that we rely on for daily commerce, our economy, and our health system, as well as our daily lives themselves.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. And just a quick follow-up question, looking at British Columbia, where would you say, what are your biggest critical infrastructures, and where do you see need or some weaknesses?
Well, so I am residing here in Vancouver, British Columbia. Population of about 5 billion people on the west coast of Canada, and it is a very large province, which covers a very varied geographic terrain. And we have, like most cities in Canada, much of the urban population is on the US-Canadian border. But there is a vast geographic spread of other municipalities and communities, including with First Nations, Indigenous population, around the province, on the coastline, in the interior and up north, and on neighboring our next province to the east of us, Alberta. And so I would say that one of the critical pieces has been around transportation roadways. We've seen with flooding or wildfires in particular, challenges to shutdowns on roadways, washouts, which cause people to be isolated, of course, or evacuated from their communities when they're surrounded by vast regions of forests. We have a significant forest industry that's under some challenge here in British Columbia. But certainly transportation networks have been seen to be really critical in that. A distributed healthcare system, again, centralized in certain urban populations in the south and in the interior, also means that access to healthcare, rural healthcare centers, emergency rooms, has also been a challenge. Certainly, we see that in crisis situations where, again, people are quite isolated from their particular healthcare centers.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this. And I will come back when we talk back to you also to talk about the threats and if they have changed over the last years. Over to you, Heide. Maybe you can also share with us how you would define a critical infrastructure. And then maybe you can also tell us a little bit about your state and the district you have been elected in.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll be happy to do that. Yeah, critical infrastructure is the infrastructure that we need to continue to work also in a disruption of the regular everyday life. And we have identified and focused on 3 areas in which that can happen. And I think that is very close to the political realities for which we need to plan and be prepared. Let me start with cyber attacks and sabotage, because since we are here in Germany and also in this region, we have experienced that, and it also is linked to the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So we are here, I would say, more closer to that particular disruption, very much disruption of lives affecting many areas. And we have had to deal with that. And we have had such instances, and it's very important to be prepared for that and know how to deal with it. Cyber attacks, sabotage we have experienced, but also disinformation to a huge extent. And that is an area where also the transatlantic perspective, I think, is very important. And it was important for me to also have this background. I mention it first because our geographical location, I think, makes us even more exposed, perhaps, to this kind of disruption. And of course, with my health background, I experience very much also the potential disruptions in the health sector, and not only potential, we have experienced during the COVID-19 crisis, what that means. And we are in the process also of reforming our healthcare system to quite a considerable extent, especially hospitals. The landscape of hospitals. And there I have also been able to learn a lot from our exchange. Also, for example, the word redundancy. We need a certain degree of redundancy to have enough structures in case of a crisis like a pandemic. So these are areas which occupy us here in Saxony-Anhalt very much. But let me also mention the third area that we address, that is natural disasters. I'm very proud and happy to say that our fraction, also the SPD fraction, together with our coalition partners, and in the end with broad consensus, developed an environmental disaster and flood protection plan very recently, and we are very much affected by the risk of flood. We heard that also, of course, from other areas in Germany, and we experienced a lot of that during our visit also in Texas. We heard a lot of what is done there for prevention of natural disasters, especially flood as an example. And that is something that has kept us busy. And we have now passed the legislation for prevention of that. So I can really name examples in all the 3 areas that we had addressed. And it has been very useful to have this background and exchange.
Thank you so much for this overview. And you already jumped into the different threats to critical infrastructure. You mentioned natural disasters, you mentioned cyber attacks, and you mentioned pandemics. So, Michael, in British Columbia, does this resonate? And have those threats changed over time, or have they always been kind of the same?
Well, I think we are seeing an increase of natural disasters. There's been a real challenge, climate change, variations in terms of the temperature, the dry kindling of our forestry, our forests have resulted in very challenging times around wildfires. Again, this last summer, we saw in our neighboring province, of course, as some would have seen in the media, the evacuation of Jasper. We've seen other, which is a very significant tourist area as well, natural beauty in Alberta, next door to us. But we've seen those evacuees coming over to the border to our province as well. So there's certainly emergency measures that have to be implemented to support those residents moving. But we've also seen significant evacuations in British Columbia as well. Meeting those challenges, the variation on water flooding has been significant. We've again seen significant economic dislocation and damage in the Fraser Valley and agricultural region of our province, just outside of Vancouver. And that's just an example of the kind of challenge we're seeing on those fronts. The healthcare area, certainly, of course, we were all affected by the worldwide pandemic. There is still, British Columbia was seen, at least in their view, to be a leader in terms of public health. I think that politically, how governments handle pandemics of that nature reveal a lot in terms of vulnerabilities in the system, or who in our society is under-resourced or don't have access to the same level of healthcare that others might, particularly in rural areas of the province. People who are of certain marginalized communities like Indigenous peoples. So there's been a significant review of any systemic challenges within the healthcare system. So I do think that we are still working through the aftermath of the pandemic, which has also led to, as we see in the United States and Canada, arguably or not arguably, more polarization of the political spectrum in the upcoming elections, both across the border, but also here in our province as well next month. The critical, in terms of cybersecurity, we've seen many instances of increases across the board in our province as well, both in transportation, Transportation Authority, healthcare, employee unions, data, a large retailer that had to shut down operations, and the province of British Columbia itself. I think that of course, when it affects the government database, that is more of a concern as well, or equally more so. And I think that we are continuing to see more of those disruptions, both in our data privacy and access, various uses, both from a ransomware type attack or some attacks that are still not fully explained. So I do think from a government point of view, what we see certainly is a great deal more focus around the kind of trust we have in public authorities in dealing with these kinds of situations and crises and attacks themselves.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for this overview. We'll come back to the political decision making in a second, how to address this and how sometimes difficult and easy, or maybe easy that is. Heide, you already pointed out one plan which you were proud of, which you have passed with the coalition. But before we get to this, I wanted to ask you also, Heide, about your experience. As I told our viewers, you bring along a lot of experience with regard to the health sector and also pandemics. And this was certainly, the COVID pandemic for all of us was a shock to the system and really, so to say, a pivotal point. And we learned some lessons, and maybe we didn't learn some lessons with regard to critical infrastructure. So maybe you can tell us, what lessons do you think did we learn, and which lessons did we not learn?
Oh, that is right to the point, Stormy, really. The pandemic really taught us lessons the hard way, and both from things that were done reasonably well and those that we had to look at in retrospect and say that was not so good. We can certainly learn a lot. I can say the immediate lesson that also went or is still going into the ongoing hospital reform, health sector reform, but with a particular focus also on hospital services. It's going on in Saxony-Anhalt at the state level currently, and at the same time at the federal level. And it is interactive because we also feed back from the state level to the federal level, and we hope to finalize a large part of the process this year. One of the lessons learned is that you need to be prepared also in the infrastructure, of course. That is the critical infrastructure. It is buildings, but it is also staff. You need to have sufficient staff, not only for the day-to-day care, but also for situations like a disease outbreak. The word redundancy that I heard in the context of our group in a positive sense. We are used to see redundancy as something negative that you should avoid to be efficient. But here, for preparedness, we need a certain redundancy. We need enough personnel, healthcare personnel, and also support personnel. And I think this experience has helped, and also the analysis and the exchange that we have has helped to be aware of that. And in the funding in Germany is a bit different than in Canada or in the USA. But one of the changes that we are making in the type of funding for hospitals is that it is not only performance-based anymore, as we had it for many years, but there's also provision for contingency and a provision to keep basic services up, also if they may be to some extent underutilized. We have introduced one funding mechanism. It's called in German Vorhaltepauschale. I don't know if a suitable translation exists, but hospitals are funded also, they get a basic level of funding based on the functions that they have, which is not only dependent of the current tasks that they immediately perform, but also preparedness for situations like this, and to be there to guarantee a standard of service. I think that is a very important lesson from the pandemic. Another important lesson is that you have preparedness plans and stick to them. We did have a pandemic preparedness plan when the pandemic broke out, but it was then not quite adequate to the situation, and it was perhaps disregarded a bit too easily. Some adaptations to it would have sufficed. Now we have it updated, and it will be continuously updated to have a pandemic preparedness plan, and of course with necessary adjustments, stick to it, to have it evidence-based, and for that also to have the international cooperation. We need not reinvent the wheel. We can really build on experience between different countries. In this case, I think there is a broad case also to do it globally with United Nations organizations, in this case, the World Health Organization, WHO, to work closely with them. Yeah, so that we are ready for the next pandemic outbreak, but we are also prepared for other health emergencies. And it is very necessary to build trust. We realize that in communication with people, that trust is so essential in health advice, and also sometimes regulations that have to be given, that you need really communication, and you need a basic understanding of principles. It's called health literacy, that we need to really invest in, so that it can be recalled in times of need. We can build upon that. So communication and building of trust is very, very essential. And we do that more systematically now in our region, in Saxony-Anhalt. We do it with the universities that we have here, but they are also in contact, of course, with other institutions, including also the World Health Organization. And so preparedness plans, communication, and also having resources invested, not only for the immediate needs, but with foresight. I think these are really important lessons learned.
This sounds really good in terms of these are the lessons which we learned. And did we also then put it in practice, Michael? Is it that we are better prepared for the next pandemic, or are we already starting to forget those lessons which Heide identified?
I'd like to think that we are learning from the lessons, and they're structurally, as Heide talked about, there are similar examples here in Canada and in British Columbia. The ongoing focus, we are a province, for example, that spends over 50% of our budget devoted to healthcare. Healthcare has always been a significant focus about access, including ensuring that everyone has access to healthcare in a universal way. There is more of an onset of private care options. I think that we saw in the pandemic, of course, as well, the greater use of online virtual healthcare services. And certainly in Canada, in British Columbia, we have offerings that have continued post-pandemic. They were there before, but I think we see a greater needs to continue to invest in those platforms. But we've also seen in home care, home care facilities, both in residence, but also in long-term care facilities as well. We saw many elderly people, of course, being isolated in the old kind of build of long-term care facilities. So as we look at structurally, again, the infrastructure as to how we build new long-term care facilities and the way that they are functioning to deal with a pandemic, so that there's not the kind of risk of spread as there was in vulnerable long-term resident communities. I would say one of the points that Heide touched on as well, I do think is a big theme across all of our learnings. Certainly, when we talk to and visited in Mainz, in Germany, we had some good meetings there with some of the healthcare authority leaders, and I think that was early on in our in-person process, and really the whole recognition of the importance of trust and confidence in public authorities. Here in the pandemic, in the face of the pandemic, many public health instructions, including relating to social distancing, mask wearing, vaccinations and other ways in order to manage that challenge in a very uncertain time. I think that greater resources will continue to be deployed and based in terms of making sure that the general populace have an increased understanding, let's say, in terms of the importance of these sorts of preventative measures. We see that in the not-for-profit sector, but the greater functioning between the government, the public sector, private sector, not-for-profit sectors to work together to ensure that when faced with a challenge like this thing, we can mobilize quickly, as Heide said, but also ensure that the people have trust in what they're being told and what they're being instructed to do. Here again in British Columbia, we saw, like some other provinces of Canada, the public health officer being put out in front every day on daily updates. There was certainly initial good recognition of that professional level of presentation with our health minister. But I do think that over the course of time, these things can wane. And that's what we saw during the whole pandemic. Different information being out there on social media, counter opinions and views, which continue, right? So I do think it's been a challenge. It's an area around communication, understanding of science, science-based decision-making that we need to continue to focus on as we go forward.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we are joined now also by Tracy. Tracy is not Carrion. And now you might wonder, like, who is Tracy? Who's this person who just jumped in? She is a member of our Labs of Democracy family. And since we saw that she was online with us, we said, well, we need to then pull in Tracy. Tracy, thank you so much for just jumping in without any pre-notice. You need to unmute yourself. You're still muted.
It's so good to see everyone. I miss you all so much.
It's a little bit like a family reunion if you spend a whole year together.
Yes, yes, it is.
The valleys and uphills. This really is quite an experience. And Tracy, we are going to post her CV into the chat in a second. But you are a state senator.
Yes.
From the beautiful state of Pennsylvania.
Right.
A state which does not get any attention from media or any candidates, right?
Well, let's just say it's been a really, really interesting time to be in Pennsylvania politics right now. It's a little crazy, and I'm counting down to the election so I can have my TV back.
Oh, I'm sure. We also have a big poster here where we mark every day, which we made until the, and I'm sure that it's so much worse for you. But thank you so much for hopping in. We've already started discussing what critical infrastructure is. And we also looked at some of the threats, which you also discussed, natural disasters, cyber, and pandemics. And both Heide and Michael also talked a little bit about the issue of communication. I saw in the chat that we have also a question on water, and we come to the question on water in a second. But what Tracy, also wanted to hear from you is infrastructure is such a big thing, and it requires a lot of investment. And there are so many things which need to be done at the same time. Do you, in the state legislature, do you have a priority? Which of the infrastructure deficits and issues need to be addressed first?
You know, we don't have a formal list of infrastructure priorities, but I will tell you some things recently in the last few years have come up, and one of them is water mitigation. We've had tremendous downpour storms where we would get 4 to 6 inches of rain in such a short period of time. Our stormwater management was not able to keep up. So we have had to relook both legislatively and implementation wise how we manage not only stormwater, but pulling in also individual homes, sump pump water. You know, that was kind of a forgotten, element of the overall plan of what you do with vast numbers of water in a very short period of time, especially when we're building so many townhomes. So our impervious surfaces have become so much bigger. So we have to mitigate that, and we have to start figuring out what we do with that water. So that is for us really huge right now. We've had tremendous flooding in and around Montgomery County, which is where I represent. So that's an ongoing discussion. We saw flooding like we have not seen ever a few years ago, and we're still trying to figure out what could we have done better? What can we do now? And one of the things that I did in my district was we had 11 homes that were just completely 8 feet of water. It was just so fast. Luckily, we didn't lose any lives, but FEMA came in and bought them all out and made a park next to the creek. So that was one way to give back to the community and buy these people out. Now, they did not buy them out at the price of a damaged home. They bought them out at the price of it being fully pre-natural event. So that was full market value. They were able to move on. They also provided some temporary housing, temporary income while they were going through that transition. And that made a huge difference. So we're mitigating risk in those areas that we know flood already. But those that we have unexpectedly had flooding, we're still kind of working through what statutorily we can do to make sure they're protected in the future.
No, thank you so much. This is also what we heard, and what we also see in Germany. We have a lot of areas which deal with flooding. We also heard it from British Columbia. The question in the chat also builds on the issue of water, but asking a little bit more about drinking water and access to drinking water. And how to address conservation and treatment and oh, well, I mean, you know what I mean. Getting the water clean again. It's a really hard word in English. Is this an issue, Tracy and Michael, in your provinces and states, the issue of drinking water?
So I have an area in my district that the water, the area well had been contaminated. So for the last 20 years, they have had water delivery services, which is insane. Now, 20 years later, we're actually going to be piping in water to them from about 6 miles away. The company that contaminated the water is responsible for that, but of course it's been in litigation for 20 years. So now it's much more expensive for them to do that. But we have very strict water requirements and strict guidelines on monitoring and on testing. Unfortunately, some of my municipalities that own their water treatment facilities or own their water supply haven't kept up with the EPA's requirements. So they're a little bit behind. So they're going to see rate increases because they need to become compliant with the federal requirements of safe drinking water.
Thank you so much, Michael.
And Stormy, just to add on to that, in British Columbia and Canada, certainly we've seen aging infrastructure. There is significant need to build and upgrade, renew water treatment centers. And there's been, in the face of rising costs of infrastructure costs, we've seen some controversies locally. There's one on the North Shore in Vancouver that is many times over budget and delayed, and it's been a topic of quite controversy. In British Columbia, we are blessed with significant waterways in terms of rivers, in particular powering our hydroelectricity. But again, conservation, it is an important focus. There are certainly in urban communities water restrictions, but the importance of irrigation for agricultural sector has been under pressure in terms of the infrastructure and what's the irrigation systems that are available there. I think that we also have, as we go forward, significant focus on building more housing in our province, and the need to put more resources into the water infrastructure is being a limiting factor in terms of how quickly we can continue to build more housing because of that aging infrastructure that has to be replaced.
Yeah, thank you so much. It also shows us that a lot of the issues and problems we're dealing with are not single causal or individual in their little silos, but it has a lot to, I mean, there are overlapping risks and overlapping. That's, I guess, what also makes critical infrastructure critical, because a lot is interdependent. Heide, in your district, is water an issue? Too much, too little?
Yeah, it has become an issue recently, especially in my constituency, Wittenberg, Luther town. But water here has been traditionally, since Luther's time, I may say, has been dealt with, I think, in a very professional way. We have a water pipeline since very long. It was established decades ago, early on, and of course also we have modern water supply. And after the reunification, you know that this is in East Germany, there have also been a lot of renovations made to the water supply. But still, there was a damage to a water pipeline recently. It has been repaired, but it has also shown, it was recognized that we need to be prepared for disruptions, and that we need to look where we have to strengthen pipelines, or we have to do something. But still, I think we have a good water quality and also water supply overall in Saxony-Anhalt and also in my constituency. We still need to be alert, as this experience has shown. But we see in other areas of infrastructure that infrastructure is simply too old, and maintenance has to be given a high emphasis. We must invest more in infrastructure. Just recently, not in Saxony-Anhalt, but not so far away, Saxon, a bridge broke down. Dresden, a bridge, luckily no one died, a bridge crashed. And it shows simply that, yeah, Michael also mentioned it, transport as one of the issues. We need to invest in the maintenance of infrastructure like bridges, roads, railways, very clear. But that's general in infrastructure. And critical infrastructure is, of course, the infrastructure that is vulnerable and indispensable, and we need to reinforce that. Water supply is one area, but certainly everything to do with transport. We really need to reinforce infrastructure. And also what we worked out also in our group, in our transatlantic group, when we repair infrastructure, we should do it to the latest security standards, and not in the cheapest possible way. Yeah. So that is also an experience to bring into this decision making, that cheapest is not always best, but you have to have foresight and invest into the best possible or best needed quality level when you build new infrastructure after something broke down.
Unfortunately, thank you so much, Heide. Unfortunately, time is really running, and I really want to bring up two issues with you in the last remaining 10 minutes or 8 minutes or so. And one of them is communication, risk communication and information. And the other one is dealing, or how to deal with groups which do not have the same access to infrastructure. some minorities or disadvantaged groups in our societies, what to do about this. So, but first, with regard to communication and information, Tracy, you have worked in the military before, and preparedness is one thing, but good communication is another. So, did you translate a lot of your experience from also the military into your legislative life, and what kind of recommendation did you make or bring into the laws you passed?
So I did actually translate quite a bit. And because of that, I don't like bureaucracy. I just want to get the job done and kind of move past. And I think one thing that really helps is recognizing that you have to work with everyone, regardless of their viewpoints, regardless of their ethnic background, and it really makes it a little easier. But communication, you have to listen more than you talk. You have to gather information first and then communicate out. And repeated communication is what I have found really, really has to happen, especially during COVID, our most recent challenge. When people were being bombarded with so much different lines of communication, whether it's the news, whether it was social media, whether it was the health department's alerts, they were getting bombarded with information, and which one did you pick from? And we found that a lot of people would only listen to one piece rather than getting a complete picture. And I think that's important when we look at infrastructure challenges, is you've got to look at the big picture overall, and you have to consider everyone involved in the process making, because you can't just go from one point of view. We have had tremendous challenges during COVID, especially in Pennsylvania, where I have huge Amish communities. I have huge Mennonite communities. They do not have televisions. They have radio, but they don't have a telephone. They don't interconnect often with the English world, and anyone outside of their religion is called English. So it's very interesting, and those legislators had to reach out and really work with them to get them to understand what some of the challenges were, and work with them and understand that some of their religious beliefs were interfering with them getting the vaccination, and you had to respect that. You had to work with them. So it was a very challenging time. Luckily for me, my Mennonite community was very, very open to having conversations. Did not understand why so many restrictions were being made on their schools, and they didn't have any COVID cases. So I'm not sure what you gather from that, but yeah, communication is so important. It has to be repeated often. Sometimes the message has to be translated a little differently, even though in America we all sort of speak some type of English. You know, just depending on where you're from, you may have a little bit of a twang, as you guys saw when we were in Texas. We don't have a twang in Pennsylvania, but yeah, I think communication is really, really important, and we have to do it a lot and often, and keep those lines of communication going. And that's one shout out I'd like to give the Aspen Institute, because we all came from such diverse backgrounds, and oh my gosh, we were just a group of a whole bunch of unicorns, and we all became fun unicorns together. We all changed our stripes to be Aspen Institute unicorns. So what a great experience. And I already recommended the program to so many people, and I think Pennsylvania will have a long list of people that want to go. So shout out to Aspen for that.
No, thank you so much. And our call for application is actually out there. So we are looking for applicants. And the next study trips are going to take us to Germany and Canada. So that is also very exciting. And we have also a call for applications for our Transatlantic Farmers Program, and the American Council on Germany, ACG, our partner in our state-to-state dialogue, also has a ton of wonderful exchanges. So it really makes sense to take a look at it. So thank you so much for these nice words, but also explaining to us how important communication is. And Michael, you probably can build on this.
Well, I think the consistency has always been a challenge in uncertain times, so it can change. I think that transparency So I do agree, though, that it has to be consistent, but it has been a challenge. Government. The ability also to react and be transparent and have better explanation as to why things change and the reasons for that. The multi-language, certainly we've seen the need for that here in British Columbia with different ethno-cultural communities. It does help to create better understanding. And then in terms of marginalized communities, ones that are more vulnerable, perhaps, again, just to add to the water situation, we know that so many Indigenous peoples in Canada, the First Nations, lack clean drinking water. That has been a huge concern. But similarly, in terms of a health pandemic or other areas around working with nations on their traditional territories, it's been very important to have that level of partnership, which does mean a significant amount of resources needs to be generated in order to support that. So that's another area that we see even in emergency management, where there's greater partnership in areas that working in a more integrated way with those marginalized communities. It's a way to have them more integrated in the systems that might be deployed in the face of any particular emergency or crisis.
And Heide, what about you?
Yeah, I so much agree with Tracy and Michael about, first, what Tracy said, the importance to listen in communication. I think that needs to be really an integral part, that we listen and also incorporate what we hear about what is feasible for people or what concerns they have. Very important, and be transparent, as Michael said, is the other part. Not only communicate what to do. Of course, you have to be not too complicated in your communication, but you also have to explain background and let people understand. Be transparent how you come to certain conclusions. What does it mean? Evidence-based conclusions, etc. Both of these aspects very important. Now, of course, we do not have indigenous communities in that sense, but we also have language issues to some extent. And I think it is really good to have also in other languages information, and that we do. It's a very good point. And also in schools, we also have that approach, and parents learn a lot from their children even. So I think it's very important to carry that communication also into schools. And we learned a lot about the public health system, not only the healthcare providers, but also public health, those who gather data and those who share information, who structure the communication. We have a new public health institute being developed out of an older institution and others coming together. And I hope, and I also advocate, that this new public health institution would also be a point of contact for all the community health offices, Gesundheitsämter, as we say, for communication, to foster really the two-way communication, make communication, health communication very effective. And also the scientific community has a role in all this, public health at universities. So we are trying to bring that together. Really lesson learned. And I would also like to emphasize how valuable this Aspen experience has been. I like this, how Tracy described it, how we have stripes now, like Aspen, to bring together all these different experiences and learn from each other. That has been very, very enriching.
Thank you very, very much. So for the last round, I want you three to take our audience into your state, into your province, into your Wahlkreis, where you are situated and where you are based. and take us on a virtual tour to a best case of critical infrastructure management or critical infrastructure, something which you are proud of and something we could all learn from. And we have not practiced this, and I didn't tell anybody beforehand, so I'm springing it all on you. So Tracy, do you have something you're proud of you want to share with us?
I will share with you that I have Merck Pharmaceuticals in my district. During COVID, I actually have many pharmaceutical companies in and around my district. I have GlaxoSmithKline, I have Almac, I have Merck, and a couple other smaller ones, and they all came together during COVID to figure out how they could manufacture the COVID vaccination together. And boy, it was literally shocking to everyone that they were willing to come together, willing to share resources with one another. And they not only shared resources among themselves, but they made sure that all of the communities had what they needed. First, obviously going to hospitals, then going to EMS, and then to individuals, low-income individuals, or nursing homes and assisted care homes where they may not have as much because they use them all the time. So that was a huge shock. And we've taken lessons learned from that, and we've now kind of replicated that across other, for emergency management. You know, we have a water rescue team that now has expanded because other areas don't have water rescue. So they've done memorandums of understanding that, hey, if you have a need for us, we will come. And then how do you reimburse for that? And so it's been really an eye-opening experience that has helped us regionalize a lot of our assets that were limited to cover more municipalities with what we have. And it has opened a lot of dialogue. So I'm very, very proud of Merck for stepping up and doing that in a time when we were desperately needing everything during COVID.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Michael.
As I mentioned earlier, British Columbia is a vast region with a lot of natural beauty and mountains and lakes and riverways and waterways. As a result, there's a significant and continues to be a lot of local initiative in the face of protecting critical infrastructure during an emergency like floods or wildfire. So significant local community efforts, I would say. It's recognition that communities need to work together to have emergency management centers come up quickly, to be able to welcome so many evacuees into their local communities, to provide them with food and housing and clothing and their needs. And we've seen time and time again in our province, British Columbia, citizens and communities of the province step up in many ways, in many good ways. The layer on top of that, I mentioned earlier about the integration between federal, provincial, municipal, and First Nation level organizations and authorities. There is greater work to be done to coordinate those efforts, to have a common operating platform. That work, I know, is continuing, and I have good hopes that that will bring better abilities, local initiatives to respond back, and also to be more predictive in where the vulnerabilities are in various pieces of infrastructure that are resistant to natural disasters, for example. But again, I want to just take this opportunity, of course, to thank Stormy and the whole Aspen Institute team for organizing and hosting us in so many good ways. I hope this session has provided an opportunity to, for those attending, some learnings from what we have certainly benefited from, and sharing a lot of great experiences and a lot of great talks and discussions, sessions that really encourage others to consider applying for this program, and look forward to next year's class and study as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And last but not least, the last word belongs to Heide.
Wow, thank you very much. Yeah, after these very strong presentations that we have heard, what is there to add? But just a regional perspective here from Saxony-Anhalt. Lutherstadt-Wittenberg, of course, Luther is always there, but I don't see it that much in a religious sense, or there's also a lot to see critically about that, but we have an international transatlantic heritage here through the Protestant tradition of even during the times of separation between East and West, a lot of exchange, transatlantic exchange through that. Culturally, let me stay with that a little. We also have the Bauhaus in Dessau. And you know the slogan of the Bauhaus? I heard first outside Germany, form follows function. And I really love that slogan. That is the Bauhaus slogan. And it means, yeah, a very objective-oriented process. And it means also a combination, I think, of art and science, a tradition of that approach. And practically, I see that happening by a lot of investment, and I think also wise investment, both from private and public side, in technologies where we need to make sure to be less independent on supply chains. To mention two examples, or several. We have, for example, as a transatlantic project, I can say our efforts to attract Intel here for chip manufacturing. It might be cheaper to buy these products elsewhere, cheaper from China or whatnot, but we consider it very important to have this transatlantic cooperation here, and we do a lot to bring it here. So I'm really glad about that. And also we have initiatives in technology, semiconductor technology, in battery technology, a startup company called Tesvolt that is also going to USA and other countries, and there are cooperations. And we also have chemical and pharmaceutical industry here, which I think is very important for critical supply chains. I would love to go on, but
but I can't let you. I can't let you because we are already over the time. And I need to let everybody go. But this last round also showed to us there is a lot to see and to learn from each other. And I think cooperation across the Atlantic, a true transatlantic cooperation, really makes us all stronger, apart from having a bigger family and also a lot of fun, which we had today. So thank you so much to Tracy, to you for jumping in short notice, to Heide and to Michael for sharing your experiences. And we certainly hope to see all of you soon again. I also want to thank ACG again as a really strong partner and having so many wonderful transatlantic projects and exchanges. And I think this fall is going to be exciting for all of us. So Tracy, hang in there. And we're feeling with you. Thanks to all of our participants and viewers today for joining in and also sharing questions, and certainly also to the team of the American Council on Germany and my team for preparing this. And with this, I let you go. Have a great evening, or on the other side of the Atlantic, have a great day. Bye-bye. Tschüss.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.